What if, and I know it's a crazy concept, what if the Bears just lost to a playoff caliber Oklahoma State team? This is Locked On Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Drake Toll here alongside of Marshall Scott. Marshall's of pistols firing and knows everything there is to know about Oklahoma State. We both want to thank you for making Locked On Baylor your first listen every single day, because Oklahoma State doesn't have a Locked On podcast. Marshall, there's your bug. There's the bug in your ear for yourself or whoever you love to start a Locked On Oklahoma State podcast so we can riff it. But luckily, I still get to talk to you about a game that, to me, Marshall, every year in basketball, these two teams play. Oklahoma State gets a big lead on Baylor, and then they succumb at the end of the game and Baylor wins. It felt like, to me, that's the trajectory where this game was going, especially when the Bears cut it into one possession. But Oklahoma State looked really good and got the win in Waco.
Yeah, Oklahoma State's kind of gained the mantra of the cardiac Cowboys in many sports, just because it seems like nothing can ever just go smoothly. And they were kind of, whenever Spencer Sanders threw that interception in the second half, Baylor had some momentum. It kind of felt like, oh, here we go again. Like this is going to come down to the wire. So I was kind of impressed with Oklahoma State being able to, Baylor would answer, Oklahoma State would have an answer to that answer, and they just kind of kept that gap throughout the year. But yeah, solid game. It just kind of looked like Oklahoma State was the better team. I didn't know a whole lot about Oklahoma State going in based on the non-conference schedule, but I picked Baylor on our site going into the week. Just because I thought they'd been more battle tested, and obviously being at home, I thought that'd be a bigger deal than it was. So, it kind of just looked like Oklahoma State was the better football team.
I'll leave really my first question and to open the show just on what you saw out of Baylor. I want to leave it vague. What did you see out of the Baylor football team?
Yeah, so we'd heard all this great things about the Baylor offensive line, and I thought particularly in the first half, it seemed like Blake Shapen had a week to throw. I tweeted that he could probably do a cartwheel. You said that you wouldn't advise him doing that. But I think that advantage kind of started to lessen as the game went on a little bit. They're getting a little bit more pressure on them. And then I'm really intrigued by just them being who they are. Dave Aranda is going to go for it on fourth down. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the time before didn't work. He's going to do it again. And Blake Shapen's ability to just be okay with checking it down and just kind of guiding a team down a field. I feel like Spencer Sanders has more ability than Blake Shapen. Yeah. But at some point Spencer Sanders is going to be like, okay, this is getting a little old. I'm either going to, run out of here and try to make something happen with my legs, or I'm going to chunk it downfield. Blake Shapen's ability to just kind of dink and dunk and dink and dunk. I found that kind of impressive. I think Baylor's whole kind of, you can kind of see the culture of them. Just, we are who we are, and we're not going to deviate from that. And I thought that was really interesting coming out of the game.
Baylor's defensive line has been something that coming into the year, everybody talked about. Yosiaki Ika being one of the premier defensive players in the Big 12, and really across the board, even without Terrell Bernard or Jalen Petrie, looked like the front 7 or 8 guys at Baylor were just going to be elite. And then no sacks on Saturday, and really not a ton of pressure. Oklahoma State had as much success running the football as they really wanted to, especially on crucial downs. Were you surprised with how well the Cowboys were able to gain ground on the ground against the Bears?
Yeah, we didn't know a whole lot about the OSU running game going in, because part of that had to do with the non-conference schedule. And then it's really been a kind of take what the defense gives you kind of year.
Yeah.
Central Michigan said, hey, throw it on us. And that's what Spencer Sanders did. To an extent, that's what Arkansas Pine Bluff did whenever Oklahoma State lit them up. So it was really just that Arizona State game where the run game kind of got going. So we didn't know a whole lot about it. I think what impressed me about it is Dominic Richardson, Oklahoma State's running back. He's not as good as Jalen Warren, who they had last year.
Yeah.
But the way that he just kind of pounds and pounds and pounds, and he falls forward constantly, I think that can be kind of grinding on a defense where, the first couple quarters, you're like, okay, like whatever. And then the third and fourth quarter, you're like, holy crap, I still have to tackle this guy who's just, running downhill constantly. I thought the Oklahoma State run game kind of wore them out. And as they went, that kind of, extrapolated a little bit. You mentioned Siaki Ika. Mike Gundy freaking loves Siaki Ika. Like he said so much about him that I think if Siaki Ika entered the transfer portal, Mike Gundy wouldn't be able to recruit him because it'd be a recruiting violation because he's talked about him so much. So he loves him. So I think they really game planned around that. Gundy kind of said going in why they went for it on that early fourth down on Oklahoma State's first drive was because he told the team that, hey, if we get down and it's a short yardage, we're going to go for it because we can. And he wanted to kind of wiped the slate clean of what happened in Arlington. So I thought that was a cool mindset to go in there with. But yeah, I think that Oklahoma State's offense more so, and you got the speed and all that stuff. I think it kind of just wore Baylor down as the game went on. You particularly saw that in the third quarter.
So we've hit the Baylor offense and the Baylor defense. Marshall, is the Baylor special teams the single worst special teams you've ever seen in your entire life, aside from the punter?
So Oklahoma State has been really good in that aspect. Jaden Nixon, he's a running back, but he doesn't get a whole lot of play. He didn't get a carry, I don't believe, the other day, but he's a speedster. He runs like 10.6s in high school. Brendan Presley had the big return against OU last year that kind of turned the tides in that Bedlam game.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's an OSU. I think it might more so just be an OSU thing. I think that's kind of an area that they're getting really good at. Tom Hutton, the Australian punter, he's 32 or 33 at this point. He's not going to, boot at 60 yards. He's going to pin people down. And that kind of led to that safety. So I think it's just an area that Oklahoma State has really focused on. And I think if these two teams do meet up again, the Big 12 championship game or whatever, I imagine that's going to be an area that Dave Aranda, doesn't take nearly as lightly as he might have taken coming into this game.
So from what you saw out of Baylor, and I think we've talked about it on the show all week, the atmosphere was not great. It seemed like never was the team able to feed off the fans. There just wasn't that powerful moment you see in a lot of these home games where, especially when a team needs a jolt to come back. Even that, all that aside, is this a Baylor squad that you still think contends for the top of this conference or for Big 12 title? Or really, especially in comparison to the parity of the league, do you see a middle of the pack Bears?
Yeah, I thought just to further shovel the crowd a little bit, it was just so weird that at halftime it's 16-3. That can turn so quickly, as we've seen in these Baylor and OSU games before, that it seemed like a lot of people left. I'd heard that some were just like getting away from the sun and like under the awnings and stuff like that. So yeah, but there wasn't really ever a moment where it's like, oh, everything's going against Oklahoma State right now. And I think that should have happened when Spencer Sanders threw that interception. That should have been like, like, here we go. Like, this is it. But it kind of just died down. Spencer Sanders comes out, throws a 49-yard pass. And all of a sudden, like, everything's fine again and more people are leaving. So, but as far as I think that there were definitely times where we saw that these could definitely be the two best teams in the conference. I hate to keep hitting on the kid. I forget his name that dropped the passes.
Oh, gosh, Gavin Holmes.
Yeah. Oh. So, but like, you just think of it's a game of what ifs, right? What if he catches that one on the first thing? What if he just knocks the interception one down? Like, it doesn't even have to catch it. Like, what if it just didn't go directly into Thomas Harper's hands? What if Baylor can get Jaden Nixon on the ground on that long kickoff return for a touchdown? So, you look back at, and I'm sure that's the truth about every game. You look back at 2 or 3 plays that kind of make a big difference. But I think that, if these two teams do go again, and 2 of those plays break Baylor's way, then I think that this could be a totally different game. But I think for a large portion of that game, it was a fun chess match, and you could probably see that, the conference is crazy right now. But you can definitely see that these are 2 of the better teams in the league for sure.
Certainly a lot of respect between coaches, and you could say, I think chess match is a great way to explain it, looking at the way that both head coaches attack the game. And you're right, 2 fumbles for Oklahoma State that Baylor didn't recover, and a Baylor fumble that Oklahoma State didn't recover. Any of those could have turned this into a 21-point game for Oklahoma State or a 3-point Baylor win. But Marshall, I really want to get a scope on how good this Oklahoma State team is, because the better they are, the better I feel about Baylor losing this game. But before we get to that, trust me, to everybody at home, Marshall's not going anywhere. I just got to tell you about our newest sponsor at Locked On, Upside. From cringing at the pump to getting an eye-popping check at your favorite restaurant, inflation is hitting us all. The other day, I went to fill up my gas tank. Look, it's gotten better. It has gotten better, but it's expensive. It is not fun to fill up gas. So I've stopped driving as much as I drove. Walking's not fun either. I've just realized there's not really a fun middleman in there either way. But Upside's been actually really good help. It's wild how many of these ad reads since I got to Locked On. It's been like, I'll try this. And it's worked out really well. Upside's one of those, actually. To get started, download the free Upside app. Not too good to be true. Use promo code LOCKED and get $5 more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You check in at the business, pay as usual with your credit card, your debit card, and then you get paid. Credit card companies have these reward points, loyalty programs. You can earn 3 times more with with Upside. It's where users are making more than $1 million a week combined. It's probably why they have a 4.8 star rating on the App Store, by the way. Download the free Upside app. Use promo code LOCKED to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more, $5 or more for free on your first purchase of 10 or more using promo code LOCKED at Upside. Marshall, you've already mentioned once the game last year in Arlington, and that's got to be fresh on the mind of Spencer Sanders, along with the 7 interceptions he threw against Baylor last season. That was the storyline last week for most Baylor outlets. He ends up playing a really solid game, and they avenged that loss in the Big 12 championship. How much of those two things do you feel like were on the mind of this team and coaching staff?
Yeah, and just talking to the players beforehand, I went and asked a lot of guys like, hey, do you use last year's game to fuel you? Is this two totally different teams? Like what? And it was kind of mixed. You know, some people were like, oh yeah, like, you know, I've thought about this a lot. And then some people like Brock Martin, a senior old guy, he was like, I mean, I'm just going to work on my job and I'm going to do that. And that's how it's going to go. So I think it was a little mixed in terms of that aspect. And then the interceptions, you know, we mentioned the pass rush, Baylor's pass rush earlier, not getting to Spencer Sanders that much. I think Gundy said he went back and on 4 or 5 of the interceptions, he was getting hit as he threw against Baylor last year. So just keeping him upright, you know, he's still going to make some questionable decisions at times, but keeping him upright, keeping him, you know, available to use his legs and get out of the pocket. I just think he's transformed a lot. It's great. I wonder what the difference is of, you know, what Baylor fans think of Spencer Sanders versus what the rest of the Big 12 fans think of Spencer Sanders. Cause it feels like they were two totally different guys before this weekend. But he's been freaking good. I mean, like he's going to be he might be the team's leading rusher. He's going to be, you know, top 5 in passing in the Big 12. So I think if Oklahoma State somehow goes on some magical run, it's going to be behind Spencer Sanders and he's going to be up for all these awards and things like that. And that's crazy to think just based on that, you know, 4 interception game in Arlington. But yeah, I just think he's been a whole lot better. And obviously him not getting sacked, him being able to stay upright and get out of the pocket was really big on Saturday.
Wild for me to think of all these media outlets and guys are picking him as the best quarterback in the Big 12 in the offseason. And I'm sitting there thinking, no, please, no, don't do this. He's got 7 interceptions against Baylor in 2 games. But then you look at the games where he's not playing Baylor last year. He was solid and really good on Saturday again. I go back to that Notre Dame game. Feels like a kind of a turning point for him that since then he's just been the best quarterback, most consistent, at least in the Big 12. It's tough to argue that. And I liked not only what I saw out of him, but also the ground games we already mentioned. You touched on the fact that this was a feel-it-out game for you. What does Oklahoma State really have when they go against top 25 caliber competition? And for this to be a figure-it-out, feel-it-out game, and for them to still win by double digits on the road, what does that say truly about the ceiling of this team?
Yeah, I think, and then kind of going back to him on Spencer Sanders a little bit, I think he really likes playing up tempo. That's what they did in the Fiesta Bowl. They in that second half, they just kind of let him go. Right. And you'd think with a guy who struggles with decision making sometimes that might hinder him, but it seems to just, you know, like less thinking, just like go out and do it. And but as far as Oklahoma State goes, I think that this team, maybe more so than last year, can beat teams in a variety of ways. If people are going to like hang back and not allow Spencer Sanders to throw it over the top, then Dominic Richardson's going to pound, and they're going to play complementary football like they did last year for most of the year and just kind of let a defense win a game. The defense not as good this season, just based on the experience that they lost on the back end. But like game by game, you can see these improvements that they're doing. Obviously, Monterey Baldwin got loose a couple of times. Gundy said on that 4th and 5 or whatever it was that went for 70 yards and a touchdown. Gundy said that was his fault, that Derek Mason, the defensive coordinator, you know, called his play, and then Gundy said, no, I don't like that, and tried to check out of it like as the snap was happening, and then, you know, Baldwin got lost and was running down the field. So I think the defense is getting better and better each week, but I think that more so than anything, I think we found out that this is a team that can beat teams in a variety of ways, can still play complementary football somewhat like last year, but still has a little bit of that old Oklahoma State in them that likes to run up the scoreboard, that likes to, you know, get the ball on the perimeter and let a bunch of guys, you know, kind of beat you in space.
Is this, and you've seen a few of them too, especially with Oklahoma making their playoff runs. It's been a while now, by the way. The Big 12 hasn't been to the playoff here in a bit. Is this a college football playoff caliber Oklahoma State team? I
think they've got as good a shot, especially right now, as anybody in the Big 12 for sure. Yeah. It's just so crazy because you don't know what the Big 12 is going to give you week in and week out. Texas Tech say what you will about Texas, but you usually got a lot of good athletes. Texas Tech, beat Texas the other week. They're coming into the Stillwater, and then LSU's going down to play TCU, and they beat the crap out of OU last week.
Now that's a hard game for some reason. Thanks.
And then K-State, they have a back-to-back trip to Kansas with K-State and Kansas, who are both good teams. Obviously, Bedlam's going to be ridiculously wild. So I guess then you're just hoping, hey, maybe those Iowa State and West Virginia games are actually going to be solid, comfortable wins at this point. So I think they've got as good a shot as anybody, especially if the defense can continue to get better, especially the secondary. The linebacker play can continue to get better. I think that this equals, I'm not sure if they, just based on how the Big 12 has been this year, I think if Oklahoma State or Baylor or Kansas State, if they have one loss, I think that's going to be tough for them to get in, just because the rest of the league is going to kind of cannibalize itself at some point. You're going to have like a lot of teams in the late teens, early 20s, but maybe not that bell cow that's OU or Texas that has a helmet logo and things like that. So I think Oklahoma State might have to run the table, but I think they should be favored in every game from here on out. So I think it's possible. Yeah.
I want to get your thoughts now on the entirety of the Big 12, because I know at your outlet, you guys are one of the more prominent news outlets for Oklahoma State, covering them. So you got a great scope on the conference as a whole. Is this as wild as you've seen the Big 12, especially in its 10-team format, which would go back about a decade?
Yeah, I think almost without question at this point, because we thought nothing about TCU. We thought nothing about Kansas, because nobody's thought anything about Kansas in a really long time. And all of a sudden that game has game day this week. OU and Texas, both, Texas is Texas at this point. They're not good. That's just that's how it is. But OU's and Texas, they're both still going to have athletes. They're both still going to have a shot in any game they're in, just because of the quality of player that they have. So that's going to be crazy. I'm really looking forward to this weekend and the Red River Shootout or rivalry or whatever we call it these days. Baylor really good. Weird that they already have 2 losses on their slate. K-State looks amazing. Who's going to stop Adrian Martinez? I don't know. Historically, Oklahoma State's had trouble with scrambling quarterbacks. So I don't. Maybe that's a tough thing for Oklahoma State. I mean, then even like West Virginia and JT Daniels, they've had their moments this year where they've they've looked pretty good. Iowa State should have beat Kansas last week with field goals and things like that. So I think that, especially, I think this is probably the second best conference in the country right now. Nobody's going to say that nationally because everybody loves the Big Ten, even though I was in the Big Ten and they stink. And, the Big Ten West stinks. And everybody in the Big Ten, essentially, except for Ohio State, stinks. I think the ACC is actually pretty good this year. I think that's a little underrated with Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson and those guys. I still don't know what to think about the Pac-12. I think that I think it's a joke that Oklahoma State's not rated as highly as USC, that USC jumped Oklahoma State and even past this win stayed ahead of them. So, but as far as the league as a whole goes, I think it's a bunch of good, maybe not great teams, or maybe great but not elite teams. So I think this is probably the most fun ever, and it makes me really look forward to that 12-team playoff, because if this league does cannibalize itself, nobody's going to get in. But whenever that 12-team playoff comes, all this parity can still take place, and somebody still gets in.
Yeah, the Big Ten's wildly top heavy. It is Ohio State and Michigan, and then pretty much everybody else. And the Big 12 is so balanced that look. This is nothing against Oklahoma State either. It's just how good these teams, like Oklahoma State, could lose to TCU, and at this point, it would make sense. There's really not. What conference could you pick any matchup, have a winner in that matchup, and say that makes sense? That's every single team in every game in the Big 12. It would just check out. If Baylor loses to West Virginia in Morgantown, I wouldn't be shocked whatsoever. And West Virginia is now probably the worst team in the Big 12, and they're still not bad. They're a bowl team in most other conferences. So it bodes well, says a lot about this league. But to me, it started to shape out. It's early, really, really early. But Oklahoma State and Kansas State seem to have that leg up on everybody else. Do you think it's funneling toward a 2-horse race that includes those 2 horses individually?
I think so. I'm really intrigued by TCU too, honestly. Oklahoma State beat the bricks off TCU last year. It was like 62-9 or something ridiculous. So I don't.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah, I haven't watched a ton of TCU. I don't know why they're good. I don't know why they beat the crap out of Oklahoma. I just know that they have so far. So TCU intrigues me a little bit. K-State intrigues me, obviously, just with what Adrian Martinez can do, but also they lost to Tulane, right?
They did lose to Tulane.
How is that
weird.
possible? How is that even possible? So, I think Baylor's going to have some stuff to say about some of these teams. I think Oklahoma is still going to, they're going to figure something out. I don't know that they'll, win 9 games, but I think kind of towards the end, they're going to get back to at least being in dogfights with teams and not just getting blown out. So, but yeah, I think especially given the footing that both of these, they've already gone on the road and had a big win. Wait, was Kansas State game in Norman?
Yeah, it was in Norman. Yeah.
Okay. So both of these teams have gone on the road, have a big conference win. I think that can be crucial, especially because, if everybody's going to beat everybody, you're going to assume that more home teams are going to win. So I think those 2 road wins against, contenders will be a pretty big deal. But I'm not ready to put anybody even in the championship game quite yet.
Yeah, are you like buy or sell on the Big 12 championship game featuring 2 teams who both have 2 losses in conference play?
I guess right now I would sell that because Oklahoma State's still unbeaten. Because that would then mean Oklahoma State's going to lose to Kansas State and Oklahoma, which is very possible. But I think Oklahoma State should figure out a way to beat at least one of those teams. But I think it'll at least include one team that has 2 losses, maybe one team that has 3 losses. But I think for right now, I would sell that just until Oklahoma State loses a game. Then I think I'll pick that up.
Yeah, and it's so weird to me too that Oklahoma State has still only played really one quality opponent. So we've seen plenty of teams. I think BYU's kind of in that limbo area right now where they beat Baylor, a quality opponent, but are they really a good team or do they get up for one game? I don't think that's the case for Oklahoma State, but it's still the jury's still out there that could be, this team could be in a 9-3 and still go to the Big 12 championship, by the way, probably not the Big 10 championship. Moving forward, though, we have done plenty of spots together, but I have not done a spot with you since the realignment. Everything shook up and the Big 12's adding these 4 new teams, which would just throw a complete wrinkle in this season that would drop 2 of the bottom 5 Big 12 teams be leaving for the SEC, and you add in 4 quality squads. What are your thoughts on getting those 4 guys? I know a lot of folks are getting kind of upset about the whole Houston deal now that they kind of suck this year.
Yeah, I think you say what you will about Houston and that they do suck this year, but I think that's kind of a sleeping giant of a program just because of the area that they sit in. Louisiana, despite its population, they pull a lot of recruits every year. That's a place Oklahoma State started to go into. So I imagine Houston would probably do the same thing, and then obviously the Houston area. So I think that's kind of a sleeping giant. They just have to figure it out, essentially. BYU is really exciting just because they add, Oklahoma State already has the 2 schools with the religious ties in TCU and Baylor. So that wasn't that big a deal to me. And it's such a cool atmosphere up there just in watching that Baylor game. So I think that's a quality add. Cincinnati's kind of the outlier to me in a way, just because it's kind of out there. I guess West Virginia and that have some sort of something. I don't know. And then I'm not quite a Disney adult, but I'm almost a Disney adult. So I love Orlando. I'm just looking forward to that trip every however many years Oklahoma State plays there. So really looking forward to all of that. Really, it's going to suck that road trips are a little longer. Might have to fly once or twice more a year, but I think I think the Big 12, just in general, because then you look at the Pac-12, and this happening a year later for the Pac-12 meant that they can't get BYU because they're already in the Big 12. I think that it happening when it happened for the Big 12 was almost beneficial in that now the Pac-12 is kind of just out of luck. There's nobody really that they can add of quality. Are they going to add a San Diego State? Cool, but like, what does that do for you? So, I think the Big 12 just in general did a really good job of quickly adjusting and finding solid teams that add something to the league.
Oh yeah, like if you go add Fresno State, San Diego State, Boise State to your conference, that's not a pillar of teams that could keep you afloat. Whereas it feels like the Big 12 going after these brands are all squads that have been in the top 10 or somewhere in that category the last few years is huge. Before we get you out of here, though, for anybody out there that's listening that's an Oklahoma State fan joining us or a Baylor fan that just wants to look at your content, especially from last week's game, where can they find you and all your stuff?
Yeah, so our website is called pistolsfiringblog.com. We have podcasts. I'm not a part of the podcast, so you won't have to hear my raspy voice there, but podcasts, all kinds of articles throughout the week, cover all the major sports, wrestling, which Baylor didn't participate in, but this is a big deal at Oklahoma State. And then our Twitter is at Pistols Guys.
I love it. I'm Drake Toll from Sports Illustrated's Inside the Bears. That's Marshall Scott from Pistols Firing. Thank you for making Locked On Baylor your first listen every single day. Come back tomorrow because the content is not slowing down on Baylor, Oklahoma State. Bears lost. What do they got to do to stop doing that? All of that and more coming up on Locked On Baylor.